So today I'm here with James McLaren, and I am interviewing him at the Benzie Public Library for the Veterans History Project. Okay, James, I have a few questions.
First of all, call me Jim.
Jim? Okay. So where did you grow up?
I was born in Yale, Michigan, and kind of grew up on a farm out in Emmett, which is west of Port Huron on the way into Flint, and then lived in the city of Flint, or outside the city. My parents didn't always get along, and I was raised by my grandmother and my uncle Bill in Maryland, and my Aunt Marilyn. And then I would go back with my folks. It was kind of a back and forth thing. We eventually, when I was around 14, 14, we moved out east where my dad was from. My dad was from Boston, Gloucester, Massachusetts, in that area. And we lived in North Reading. Used to go into Boston Garden, watch the Celtics play basketball, the Red Sox. We eventually moved up into New Hampshire, up in Milford, New Hampshire, and I was there till I was 17, 18.
So did your parents serve in the military at all?
Both of my folks were in World War II. My dad was actually at Pearl Harbor when they bombed it. He was a pharmacist. My grandfather had drugstores, his dad, and he joined the Army back in 1940. Back then you went in for a year to do your service, but the war started, and then you didn't get out. And nobody that went in really got out till after 1945. Mm-hmm. He went in thinking he would be a pharmacist. He was licensed, graduated from Boston College, but they saw he had a license to sail in and out of Boston Harbor, and so they sent him to tugboat school, and he ended up over at Pearl Harbor, captain of a tugboat, a big ocean-going one that would go in and out of the harbor and bring the battleships and the carriers in. He tells a funny story because my mother joined the Waves, and she was in the Navy, and he thinks he brought her ship in when she came over to Pearl. He said he wouldn't have. That's on my mother's side, besides my mother, her sister, and her 3 brothers were all in World War II. And that was pretty atypical back then. The call to duty seemed to go everywhere, and my grandmother had back then if you had children in the service, you had stars. And so she had 5 stars in her window, and that represented 5 children. And I ended up with that flag eventually.
So were your parents happy about you joining the service?
I think my mother was. My dad was, and he wanted me to do other things. My Uncle Bill had been in the Navy, and I always looked up to him, and so I had decided I would join the Navy. And along the way, got interested in submarines, so then applied for the Submarine Service, and then you get tested for that.
What kind of training did you have to do for submarines?
Submarines? I joined the reserve when I was 17, and went to meetings over at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and they had submarines over there. That's when I kind of got interested in. but I was still in high school. I was in the 11th grade then, and 17, yeah. The following summer I went to submarine school, and you had quite a bit of training. Well, first of all, you talked to psychologists, psychiatrists. They kind of wanted to see if you were abnormal enough to join subs. Not many people. The washout in the class was 50–60%, I think. And it was pretty rigorous to get into the program to start with. Then we'd start the morning off like at 5:30 in the morning. And you just had training. We had an escape tower. There was actually one in Pearl Harbor, and there was one in New London, Connecticut. I brought along a picture of it. They're no longer there now, but years back, if a sub sunk and it wasn't too deep, you could escape from it. And so this tower was to train you to do ascents. So you would start maybe at 50 feet, and then at 100 feet you would go into a pressurized tank. Maybe 6, 8, 10 people could fit in it. And they filled it full of water, and that pressurized it, and there was a little air bubble at the top. But then you were able to open that door that was in that tank that led to the surface. Then you ducked out and you started expelling your breath as you did your ascent. And there was divers stationed along the way to make sure that you kept expelling your air, because if you didn't, your lungs would blow apart. So you kind of just, they used to say go and blow, you kind of tipped your head back and just started blowing out. And it was amazing for the whole 100 feet as you went to the surface. The air just kept coming out of your lungs because it had been expanded or concentrated or whatever when you were down at that depth under pressure.
Would you say that was like one of the harder parts of training?
Yeah, we normally saw some people fail that. No, I think you either accepted it or decided to do it or not, you know, kind of put your big boy pants on and did it. You had a lot of older people around giving you encouragement, you know, just don't worry about it, just get in there and do it, you know, that kind of encouragement.
So what was your favorite part of training?
I enjoyed, went to a firefighting school out in Treasure Island off of San Francisco. That was kind of interesting, learning how to put fires out in a contained area. That was a kind of a, I don't know, favorite, but it was very interesting to learn how to do that. And I think later on in life that was a reason I went and joined, part of the reason I joined the fire department after the service.
So like what initially attracted you to submarines?
I think when I was still 17 out in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, they had, there was submarines out there, and I got an opportunity to go on a few of them. And just got intrigued right then.
So was there a part of military life that was like hard to adapt to, or did you fit right in?
Adapting, yeah, I didn't make a lot of friends when I was in school, really. I was always more to myself, I think, and so I think it was hard to learn to get along with everybody in a closed confinement. But once you got comfortable doing that, then you made friends for life.
So how did you keep in contact with your family and friends at home?
Back then, really not much while I was gone for a few years. One of my cousins, Patty, wrote me a lot of letters, and my grandmother, who helped raise me, wrote me some letters. Yeah.
So, how long were you in the service?
Well, I joined the reserve when in '64, and I was discharged in 1970. When I left the service in '68, I had done my obligated time for active duty and went to, I had two uncles that were on the fire department in Flint, in the city of Flint, Michigan, and my one uncle Bill, who had helped raise me, told me to come to Flint and he would assist me getting on the Flint City Fire Department, and kind of went that route and got on the fire department.
I see you brought your uniform today. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
This was atypical back in the '60s. You had a rating on the side, and this is an older one. I think this was one that I had left at home at one time. I had a couple others that we cut up and made. My wife Constance helped me make uniform for the kids. For my one son Brandon, made him a small Navy outfit, so she had cut one up. And I brought along a set of jumpers, a lot of bell bottoms is what they're called. And these are called dress blues. A lot of people don't know, well, first of all, the difficulty in using them if you had to go to the bathroom because you had 13 buttons to undo. But there was 13 buttons on them, and that represented our colonies, which these type of uniforms obviously aren't around anymore. Okay.
Are those awards or certificates for?
These are, some of these are, I think I have more on the table. This was one that I certified in Submarines. Some of the other ones were, after I was out of the service, after you qualify in Submarines, it's a rigorous thing to become qualified. You have to learn everything in a submarine, and that means every valve, every line, that you can go into any of the compartments and you can identify or sit down and draw out that complete system. Let it be the freshwater system or the electrical system in a submarine. You have to be able to operate everything in a submarine. Even though you might be a sonarman or a torpedoman, etc., you can do any of your fellow brothers' jobs. To get awarded your dolphins, which are coveted, when you think you have a booklet that you have filled out as you go through the sub, and each department, the head of that department marks it off that you've learned it. And then in the end, the executive officer and the engineering officer and the cob, which is the chief of the boat, the highest enlisted man, a chief on the sub, walk you through. And as you go through different departments, they might ask you, what would you do in this situation or that situation? So you need to be able to answer all that, and eventually, if you're correct, you pass and you're awarded your dolphins, which are on that uniform right there.
Gotcha.
50 years later, if you're still alive, if these were mailed to me, I didn't even know they were coming, and I didn't even know about it. It's called the Holland Club, and these are certificates pointing out when the year I was qualified on what sub, and the fact that it's been 50 years, so it's kind of a club to be proud of if you enjoy being older. I think, and that's all these three were. And I was awarded it from two different places. I'm not sure. One is a club in Michigan called the Holland Club, the Escalar base. That's in Michigan. That's a submarine club, and the other is a national. I also belong to the International Submarines Association too, which I joined. I'm a life member, and I think back in 10 or 15 years ago.
So you said earlier that some people have like special jobs on the submarines. What was your special job?
I was a sonarman.
Sonarman?
Sonarman, yep. And but I cooked. I did a lot in the galley too. I used to do a lot of. I used to hang around the galley and cook a lot. Everybody kind of did everybody's job, but you were specialized in something. I also used to lock. We used to train and deploy UDTs, underwater demolition teams. Some of the front runners of SEAL teams. Marine reconnaissance teams too, and we would lock them out of the sub underwater in an escape tank, and they could swim in and do pre-invasion estimates. It was like training for them.
Mm-hmm. So, can you tell me a little bit more about what you would do as a sonarman exactly?
Well, we'd listen to whales.
Yeah.
Yeah. You would just usually work 6 hours on and 6 hours off. Back then was your shifts, so to speak, and you would just listen for any strange noises, other ships, and that type of a thing. We also did we didn't have radar men normally on submarines because usually it was an underwater thing. But the sonarmen also handled the radar equipment as you were coming in and out of port, or if you were on the surface.
So can you tell me how you felt the first time you went on, like in a submarine, you know? Like were you nervous or excited?
Oh yeah, definitely nervous. The first thing you do is you're the low man on the pole, so to speak. And so you get every nasty job there is. They all try to mess on all the fellow people on the subs. They try and mess with your head quite a bit. They enjoy doing that. They might send you off on a wild goose chase to get something which is non-existent, but you don't know that, you know. And so they might tell you to go to this compartment or go see so-and-so and get this, and he would say, well, I don't have it, I gave it to someone else. Or they played games with you for quite a long time before they finally let you settle in. They wanted to make sure that you were going to fit in.
Yeah.
You know? So they kind of tested your patience and I don't know, your mind, you know, how you were going to behave under stress.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
So can you tell me a little bit about your first assignment after training?
Was on the sub on the west coast called the Perch, and we were assigned out of the Olongapo in the Philippine Islands. Everybody knew the first thing you did was mess cook to start with, before you decided to. In other words, you helped in the kitchen, which is a room about half the size of this room to feed 100 people out of. In the after battery, it was called. So you did that. Then you might you sat on the bow planes or the stern planes, the dive planes. All the youngest people sat there, and that was steered in the ship underwater to go up or down and that type of thing. So you might spend usually 4 hours sitting at a bench with a wheel in front of you, maintaining a depth of certain depth, and you'd have an officer and a chief behind you, mm-hmm. directing you. Then the executive officer might be in the room with you, or the commanding officer, or the diving officer. Different officers took turns.
So how long would you be in a submarine at a time?
And the diesel boats, normally you would be out for a couple of months at a time.
Like not surfacing?
No, not on diesel boats as much. They, not like the nuclear, but a lot of times we stayed down a week or so. We had a snorkel system, so we might come to the surface and take a swim call if we were out in the middle of the ocean somewhere. The advantage was you didn't get to take a lot of showers on these subs, and everybody smelled. You had the smell of diesel fuel on you all the time, so it was in the air, and body odor and that type of thing. I found that taking that swim call in the ocean with the salty water, I wasn't impressed. So I volunteered to do the shark duty, and that's where we usually had at least two of us with a rifle, and while the fellows were swimming, I kept an eye in case any sharks came by.
Can you explain what swim call is?
That's where we surfaced out in the middle of the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
stopped, and everybody, a lot of them didn't have a bathing suit. Some guys did, but there wasn't much modesty. And you dove in the ocean and swam around and took a break.
So what did you do for recreation when you're on the submarine?
We used to get, back in the 60s, before we left, we would get quite a few movies. And so we would have movies, usually maybe 3 times a week. And a lot of times there were even current movies that had just been released. The movie industry made sure the submarines got those, that the Navy did. If we were near another sub, sometimes we would trade movies, where we both would surface and or meet up, and we would send a line over with a pulley and a basket, and we would send our movies over and they would send some back. Sometimes if one of the subs was low in a certain type of food, flour or something, and they had extra, we would trade that way too.
So, so did you do anything for good luck before you went down under the water?
Good luck. Yeah, I guess, let's see, on the Sea Lion we had a picture of a gal in the, by the diving station. We used to pat her on the butt before we went to the dive mode, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, sorry. So how did you, like, are you still in touch with your friends that you met on the submarine?
Only a couple. Actually, I was the youngest, being that I went in the submarine so young. I got to know a lot of the older fellows that had been in like 20 years or 25 years, you know, were getting ready to retire, were left over from World War II. They've all passed away. So we've had quite a few die of cancer. Submarines, like in all Navy ships, were notoriously filled with asbestos. All the piping was wrapped in asbestos, so which they've now found out, you know, is not healthy. Actually, on the one of the fellows I know is over in the Philippines that retired, and he's in his 90s now. I actually have Bob, a friend, is down in Detroit, and he and I were in at the same time. He was a couple of years older. There's only about maybe 8 or 10 that I know of that are still alive.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you say the best part of your experience was?
I think being with men that you can trust, that you depend your life on. It was an honor to be with them, to get to serve with them. You could leave your wallet laying on your rack, on your bed, full of money, and it would be there when you came back. You trusted them 100% with everything, and you defended them and stuck up for them.
So, do you recall any like humorous or unusual events that happened?
See, my wife's in the room. I'll remember a few. I mentioned the shark duty where we would look out for sharks while the fellows were swimming. And we had a young officer that had come on board, and he came up to me and asked me if I knew how to use it. It was an old M1 rifle. And I told him I thought I did if I knew how to load the thing. Well, he immediately ran to the officer up at the deck and told him that, that I didn't know how to use it. And they knew that what I had said. They all had a good laugh over it. Although that officer wasn't very good to me for a long time after that. Okay, humorous, you asked. The first person, regardless of how many years you've been in, but usually the younger people, when you go on, you're in charge of the coffee pot, which is a large, huge coffee pot. Everybody drank coffee. And so you were in charge to make sure that the coffee was made all the time. The first thing I did, seeing I kind of knew about it, is I tore it all down and carried it into the galley and started soaping it up. Well, one of the chiefs came by and saw what I was doing and started screaming at me, because you never wash out a coffee pot with soap. And so I was told never to touch that coffee pot again. And that got me out of that. I think a few of the fellas knew exactly why I did it, but and actually later on when I went on the Flint Fire Department, that happened to be their rule. You had to make the coffee at the fire station, and the first thing I did was tear their coffee pot apart and started soaping it up. And they told me never to touch their coffee pot again at the fire station, and they sent the word out to all the other stations, because when you were new, you used to travel to different, to not let me touch the coffee pot.
So, you said you would spend weeks underwater in the submarine. How often would you get to go home and visit family?
Well, I went home once in 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, you get 30 days leave time a year, but in the submarines, the yeoman station on board actually was the one that kept track of the records. So nobody was ever charged. You kind of got to take off for a week here and there, but your leave time wasn't charged against you. So when you eventually got out of the service, you could accumulate, I think, 2 years leave time. Normally everybody got paid for that leave time.
Mm-hmm. So how would you say your years in service have changed you?
I think I learned to respect, a lot of respect for people that care about other people. Mm-hmm. And I find myself disappointed in people that don't behave properly.
So what would you say for future generations that are thinking of going into the service?
I highly recommend the Submarine Service. It's exciting. It's changed a lot since I've been in, being nuclear. There's basically, there's not very many, I don't think there's hardly any diesel boats left. They've all changed. So it's all nuclear. And usually they are out 2 months at a time, completely underwater. But it's an exciting career, and they get to learn that fellowship with other people and how to get along.
So I see you have some badges next to you. Can you tell me a little bit about those?
These are just
Are those
these are just every sub had its own type of like the Perch had that insignia, and the Sea Lion had this one. And these are patches you could wear on a vest or that type, maybe at a gathering. This medal came with the Holland Club, and like I said, I wasn't even aware of it. And
Can you hold that up? Yeah.
you can see that.
Mm-hmm.
I have another one that came from the VFW a few years back that was sent to me. That was from a VFW club down in Emmett, Michigan, that my actually great uncles had started the VFW club in Emmett when they came back from World War II.
So do you remember the day your service ended?
The day it ended, it was late in 1968. Not the exact date.
So did you return home afterwards, or?
I did. My dad had a business, but I had been talking to my uncle out in Flint, and so I wasn't in New Hampshire very long. I went to Flint, and there was 300 people that were trying to get 2 positions on the fire department, and I luckily, because of my uncle's influence, I got on the Flint Fire Department and became a fireman. I found after a couple of years I didn't enjoy living in the city. The fact that I'd always kind of lived in the country more, and I had been coming. I had a place up in on the other side of the state, north of Alpena on Grand Lake. I had a little cottage, and but I had come to this side of the state a few times, and I had a friend up here who had been on the fire department, a plumber, and so I decided to leave the fire department. My uncle was very disappointed that I did, and I came up here and started working for a plumber for a while, and eventually got into construction.
So how would you say being in the military has affected your view on it?
My view, I think it was an honor to be in the military, and highly recommend if some young person not sure what they want to do with their life. I think it's good training, good rigorous training. I think it helped me in my life.
So is there any excuse me, messages that you would like to leave for future generations or people who are watching this video?
Well, this country's in a turmoil right now with the politics, but it's happened before, and previous. I think they need to look back at history, and that seems to be being lost right now, current in our time. I think young people aren't trained, aren't instructed in the history of this country enough, that they're not realizing how this country was founded and on the principles, and maybe need to learn to get along a little better and discuss the issues rather than this division that's going on now in this country.
Is there anything else that you would like to say that didn't come up in this interview?
No, this is very nice. I wasn't aware of all this that went on, that these were being sent out. And so I thank you for allowing me to do
No,
it.
thank you.
Yeah.